ora, welcome to Womenpower. American feminist and activist Florence Kennedy said more than 40 years ago that if men could get pregnant, abortion would be a sacrament. This week we're looking at how much control women have over our own bodies. We'll also talk about why women's sport is underfunded and underreported. Contraception in New Zealand is still often treated as immoral rather than a health issue. Abortion is dealt with by the Crimes Act. It bans abortion except on specified grounds. Abortion is not a woman's decision, but can only legally be performed in certain circumstances. Women must see multiple medical specialists to obtain an abortion. Why do women in 2013 still not have the right to decide when we want or don't want children? And why doesn't the law let us control our own bodies? To talk more about these issues, I'm joined by Alison McCulloch and Nicola White. Kia ora, Alison, welcome to the program.
Kia ora, Katrina.
And kia ora, Nicola, welcome.
Kia ora.
Do women in New Zealand have control of our own reproductive rights and fertility?
I would love to say yes, but and in practice it probably does play out reasonably liberally, but as far as the law goes, no. It requires two doctors to sign off any choices as far as abortion goes, and well, we all know the prescription process for contraception, which is generally about giving people choice.
Mm-hmm. And what do you think about the current law in the Contraception, Sterilisation and Abortion Act? Is it satisfactory for women or not?
I agree with Nikki about that. It's in the Crimes Act, so there are only about 6 grounds under which you can legally get an abortion. So as Nikki said, the doctors have to make sure that you meet one of the grounds, and at the moment more than 98% of abortions are approved under the mental health ground. A doctor spoke out recently sort of basically saying that women actually have to lie in order to get an abortion. Yeah. And in a way, doctors have to lie as well in order to meet those grounds. So the law is far from ideal. And I think having it in the Crimes Act definitely adds to the stigmatisation of abortion. So we would really like to see it decriminalised. It should be a health matter.
Mm-hmm. And what about access to contraception in New Zealand for women? Is that satisfactory, or should there be things done to make that easier as well?
We are getting more access on a daily basis. I think recently Jadel was made more widely available by family planning, which is it's amazing. But I think more contraceptive options would be better, as well as long-term contraception. But considering that we shouldn't be forcing women onto long-term contraception, which seems to be an issue at the moment with beneficiaries and people like that, I think as far as abortion goes, women generally only prescribed a long-term contraception option when they're there for abortion, which I think is limiting their choices, and it doesn't always work for everyone. So again, that's another element of choice that's taken away from women as far as within the abortion system. We're not trusting them to make their own choices there.
Right. And Alison, you've recently written a book about the history of abortion in New Zealand. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I looked at mostly the 1970s struggle, which is when we got the law that we've got now, but also up into the present day. And I learned a lot, I guess, about how we got the law that we have today. And I like to think that the society's changed a bit since then. That was an 87-member parliament with only 4 women MPs. I mean, there were laws that the law did allow some discrimination against women, so things have changed for the better. And so that law is 36 years old now. I think it's time for a change. I kind of looked at the different, I guess, antagonists in that struggle. So you had a feminist approach, you had a health and safety approach from doctors, and then on the other side you had the main group was SPUC, the Society for the Protection of the Unborn Child. It was a really tough and I'd say quite vicious battle. And an interesting thing that has emerged for me after writing the book is a bit of a generational split. Older women who were there will say to me, I don't think that we should be going back and trying to improve the law. Younger women are not accepting of the law. They want the law changed. I'm with them. But it sort of shows how difficult it was for the women who were there.
Mm. And you're now on a road show around the country called Pro-Choice Highway. So when did you start and where have you been and what are you doing?
I started in the middle of September, and it sort of came out after 5 years researching and writing the book. It felt like, well, write the book, publish the book, then what? I really wanted to take the book out there and sort of, I guess, raise awareness if possible. So it's a sort of a book and information roadshow, and I started out in Northland for 2 weeks and it went really well. So I'm organising meetings with people, formal meetings, but also just doing some street campaigning, you know, standing out in the street with my flag and flyers and talking to people. And younger women have been interested, really interested, and most people have been unaware that abortion is still a crime in New Zealand.
And have you been involved with the Pro-Choice Highway?
We did hold an event in Auckland on a Saturday. We had a picnic in Albert Park and we had about 50 people who attended, including children. I think it's really important to have that family element, that families support pro-choice as well. I think it's been dominated by anti-choices saying that, you know, that they have the hold on the family situation, but in actual fact I think that, yeah, people with families understand just as well that we need a law change, and it was a really positive event at the picnic to just celebrate what Alison's doing and celebrate pro-choice activism generally.
And why do you think we need a Bill of Reproductive Rights in New Zealand?
I think it's about recognising that women should have control over their own bodies, as well as it's about offering choice to families. We talk a lot about abortion because that's where most of the opposition is. You know, we've got some fairly vocal anti-choices in New Zealand, and a Bill of Reproductive Rights would open that up to try and ensure that people are making informed choices about what they do in the case of planning their families, making sure that they're choosing to have families at the right time for them, as well as dealing with unwanted pregnancies in the right way for them. So that's expanding that choice to include abortion, adoption where they want it, or keeping the baby and being supported in doing that in the best way they can.
And why do you think a Bill of Reproductive Rights would be important to have?
Yeah, like Nikki, I think that we often end up just talking about abortion, as she said, because that's where the strongest opposition is. But the pro-choice movement is about choice, and there's a bit of a move to expand that to what some people are calling reproductive justice, and I really like that because it looks at things like, you know, if you're living in poverty, you might want to keep a child but you don't have the means, well then you don't have a choice. So it's broadening the reproductive rights issue to deal with things like, you know, whether you're economically able to take care of a child, you know, what kind of situation you're in, looking at access to contraception, of course, as Nikki was saying earlier, you know, free access to contraception would be great. There's been studies that show abortion rates drop if that's what we're concerned about, where contraception is more freely available, but also not forcing that on certain groups of women. So we actually really are all about choice, and a Bill of Reproductive Rights or Justice would really broaden the issue, I think.
What changes would you like to see made to the Contraception, Sterilisation and Abortion Act, or does it need to even be covered by the law? What would be the best framework for women to give us the most choice possible?
The law should contain abortion insofar as illegal abortions as outside of the health system should still be covered. I think it really needs to be the choice of a woman, and there have been various options sort of floated around where in the later stages that it's supported by a woman's doctor. But yeah, we're all about making sure that women have access to abortion as early as possible, and that the law allows for the technological changes to be included. So at this stage, the 1977 law doesn't cover medication abortion, so that's the provision of the abortion pills. So at this point, it's trying to fit within the current legal framework, and it doesn't quite because it wasn't around when the law was set up. So expanding the law to make that easier to provide in clinics around the country to improve access for women in rural areas or earlier on in their pregnancies.
And are there countries overseas that have got laws about abortion and contraception that you think would be good models for New Zealand?
I guess closest to home, one that we've looked at recently is the state of Victoria in Australia, because they had a law somewhat similar to ours, which comes out of the British tradition. And in 2008 they actually managed to decriminalise abortion there. And their law has been a bit of a model. I mean, imagine we might tweak it somewhat, but you know, it does allow the woman to make the choice, and it takes it out of the Crimes Act, which will really help destigmatise abortion, so we can talk about it more. I mean, one of the pernicious things about our law is the silence that it imposes on women and on abortion providers. So that's one model that we would look at. Canada had basically all its abortion laws struck down in the 1980s, so that's another model country. But it's interesting that even if you do decriminalise, you have to make sure that access is provided for. So there's still, obviously in Canada, there's still a lot of opposition and people trying to close down clinics. So taking it out of the Crimes Act, making it a health issue, you still need to have legislation that ensures there are abortion services available. And
funding, I assume.
Yes, absolutely, funding. I mean, we are lucky here that abortions are funded through the health system. That's a big fight in the United States, where you know, poorer women can't access abortion services. Where you don't have funding, it's not that you don't have abortions, it's that women who have the means will have abortions, and women who don't may have to try something unsafe.
Thank you, Alison. Thank you, Nicola.
Thank you, Katrina.
Now it's time for the Womenpower fails and wins. The Womenpower fail this week goes to the Kenyan police officers who informally sentenced 3 gang rapists to cut grass as punishment for their crime. 16-year-old Kenyan girl Liz was gang raped by 6 men who stopped her as she walked home from her grandfather's funeral. After the rape, the men threw her into a 12-foot deep pit toilet and left her to die. Liz climbed out and called for help, and villagers found 3 of her attackers and took them to the police. The police arrested the men, but then handed them machetes and told them to cut grass as a punishment. The men were then sent home. More than 1 million people have now signed a petition calling for justice for Liz, who is incontinent and in a wheelchair as a result of the attack. Up to 8 out of 10 Kenyan girls experience physical violence and/or abuse during childhood. Denmark has been crowned the happiest country in the world. Not at all coincidentally, Denmark supports parents, provides healthcare as a basic right, and regularly ranks among the top countries in terms of gender equality. That is partly because Denmark has a very strong presence of women in leadership positions. The assumption in Denmark is that feminism is a collective goal rather than an individual pursuit. Women's sport receives only a tiny amount of funding and of media coverage. In the United Kingdom, women's sport attracts only 0.5% of the commercial funding provided to sport. New Zealand comes together to support the All Blacks and the America's Cup team. But where's the support for our female athletes? The United Kingdom in 2001 set up the Coordinating Group on Women in Sport to develop a strategy for boosting women's sport at all levels. The Women in Leadership Development Program has also been set up to address the lack of women in senior administrative roles in sport. It's been hugely successful. To talk about what we can do in New Zealand, I'm joined by sports star and MP, Louisa Wall. Kia ora, Louisa. Welcome to the program.
Kia ora, Katrina. Thank you very much for the opportunity to talk about sport.
You've represented New Zealand both in netball as a silver fern and rugby as a black fern. What's it like playing sport at such an elite level?
It's a real privilege, representing your country in any sphere obviously is something to be proud of, but as a 17-year-old still at high school, and it probably will be one of the highlights of my life. It's pretty special singing the national anthem, doing the haka, but representing your country within that international context. I went to World Championships in both sports. Yeah, it's priceless really. You can't pay for that type of experience. It's earned through having a code that has got competitions so that players can obviously perform, but also New Zealand being engaged within that international context to provide opportunities for, you know, players who are passionate about sport to have these, you know, these amazing dreams and visions, which is what mine was. I wanted to be a silver fern when I was 14. So I had a dream and I was able to realise that.
It must be disappointing then that women's sport receives so little media attention and so little funding support.
The media attention has historically been very poor. Other than netball, we don't and have not really highlighted women's success universally. And I think in preparing for this dialogue that we're having, you know, we really have to look back at the origins of the Olympics. Women were excluded. It wasn't until the 1920s and 30s that women were allowed to participate. And so I think if we look at the evolution of women within that international context, sport is still very much a masculine domain, but more and more I see, and particularly through our funding models, an emphasis on selecting winners. And so, for example, I'm really buoyed by the fact that Sport New Zealand has identified 4 women codes, or 4 codes, and the women's participation in those codes are hockey, rugby, soccer and netball. And traditionally, you know, my lifetime, it's kind of just been netball. So growing up, it was expected you would just play netball, but I think we've got a lot more female role models. There's still a long way to go, but we have these amazing personalities in Valerie Villi and Lisa Carrington and Sophie Pascoe. And so I think that that perception of our value in sport is starting to change.
Mm. There still seems to be a big problem on the commercial side. For example, in the UK, only 0.5% of commercial sports sponsorship goes to women, all the rest goes to men. And obviously, especially for elite sport, I mean, you need to basically devote your life to it, and you can't do that without financial support, can you?
No, that's right. And actually, that third sector involvement in women's sport is something that we still have to address. I can't believe, for example, that we still don't have a specific primary sponsor of the Black Ferns. And then as we prepare for the 2016 Olympics, where we will have both men and women's sevens, there isn't a name sponsor for our women's team. I think that that will change once we get an Olympic gold. I think there will be many sponsors wanting to, I guess, align themselves to such an elite team. So it's always been rather frustrating because the rugby union has had to make decisions about their level of support for women's rugby, and I think that if they had a commercial driver, that is a viable, you know, primary sponsor, commercial sponsor, then that would have developed the game much more. We would have women on TV, not just our netball competition, which I do have to say provides a template for us. But there are challenges, but they're not insurmountable, and I think when I look at it, we're in an evolutionary process, to be honest. Yeah.
What specific things do you think need to be done to improve the position? Does government need to do more, and how can we encourage companies to get behind women more?
I think that the sports themselves need to do more, and I also think that the government in creating what is a very outcomes-focused funding regime in some ways will benefit women's sport, because I know that our women athletes are really successful. And so I think the government are doing its job. I don't think it was primarily one of the reasons that we've become an outcomes-focused Sport New Zealand institution, but I think as a benefit from that new philosophy, women's sport will benefit because traditionally I think that a lot of investment has just gone into the sports we've always funded, which have been male-dominated sports. The next step in that phase, though, is an active engagement from the governors across our major women's sports. Netball, as I say, is leading the way, and they kind of are the template. But we've got hockey, we've got soccer. Our women's soccer team, if you look at their success, I actually think that they've got a better opportunity of being successful at a World Cup than our men's soccer team. So I think commercial sponsors are going to start picking up the women, but what we need is a framework for a national competition, and then that enables us to join possibly, if we look at soccer, the Australian League. So they have a professional league, it's televised. And so I think if we look at the Warriors and if we look at the Phoenix, if we look at the Breakers, I think New Zealand partnering Australia in an Australasian program around the development of women's sport, for me, is the way to go. And that is a code. We need the code governors to do that.
And this is not only an issue of sport, it actually relates to women's health, because about 80% of adult women in the UK don't do enough exercise to be healthy, and I think that's probably tied up in the traditional model that women were sort of weak and not muscly and all that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I also think that was the, if you look at the evolution of women's rights across society, and so, you know, we were excluded from the Olympics, we were included, and what we've seen, I think, if we look at the progression through the decades, is actually a changing political place of women across society, and in fact that the sporting context isn't immune to women's place across society. And so one of the benefits that I see, though, for having elite women role models is that they provide I guess really clear messages to women generally that being active, being involved actively in sport and recreation, yes, maybe aspiring to the ultimate level and going to a world championship or being an Olympic medalist is something you should aspire to. But I think, as you've said, the general message that women can be active, we can lead, you know, lives that includes a lot of physical activity is a really good message.
And also that it's good for women to be strong. Thanks very much.
That's right. Thank you very much.
Now it's time for News of the Week. A 3-yearly meeting of Pasifika women leaders in the Cook Islands heard that women continue to face many challenges relating to education, health, economic empowerment and violence against women. A delegate from Papua New Guinea said that gender equality would not improve in Pacific Island countries until more women were in power at the national level. A young Fijian female politician received rape threats after announcing that she would stand in elections next year. With women worldwide still not having equality, Sweden is trying a new approach of moving beyond goals such as equal pay and equal opportunity to a society in which gender doesn't matter. Swedes argue that if, even in their progressive country, discrimination against women still exists, then equal standards might not be enough. Instead, what is needed is to change deep-seated attitudes about both men and women. One effort being made to erode gender distinctions is by using a gender-neutral pronoun instead of he or she. The Time magazine, dated 4 November 2013, has a lengthy article about this. A project involving the United Nations Trust Fund to End Violence Against Women and the Samoa Victim Support Group aims to empower communities in rural Samoa to prevent and combat violence against women. The 2-year-long project has passed its midpoint and seeks to implement grassroots advocacy as well as enhancing communication with the police. The American government shutdown precipitated by the Tea Party drew worldwide condemnation. Now the Senate's 20 women, both Democrats and Republicans, are winning praise for working together, calling for an end to partisanship and showing a way forward through cooperation. Although women are still a tiny minority in the Senate, they now chair or sit as ranking members on 10 of the Senate's 20 committees and are responsible for passing the vast majority of legislation this year. They have driven debate on issues ranging from derivatives reform to sexual assault in the military. Meeting together, the female senators are showing how to get things done. Cook Islands Finance Minister Mark Brown said that intervention might be needed to fast-track greater participation by women in politics in the Cook Islands. He said there was a distinct lack of female representation in Parliament. That could be changed by taking affirmative action, as had been done in other countries. Around 60 women in Saudi Arabia defied the law by driving motor vehicles, something banned by Saudi law. The protesters risked jail terms. Outside one of King Abdullah's palaces a week earlier, 150 clerics protested against female drivers. A song satirising the ban has clocked up 7 million hits on YouTube. You can listen to No Woman, No Drive online. The Football Federation of Samoa has been actively promoting women's participation in football through monthly Soccer Sisters festivals. Last month's festival was also used to educate participants about breast cancer and its causes. Now, here are the 5 action points from this week's program. Create a bill of reproductive rights. Decriminalise abortion. Provide free contraception. Create a New Zealand coordinating group on women and sport. Set up a Women in Leadership Development program to address the low numbers of women in senior sporting administrative roles. That's our program for this week. Join us next week when we'll look at why women still get paid so much less than men. Why is this a problem that persists around the world? And can pay equity help to improve the situation? Thanks for watching. Ka kite anō.